Hello everyone. Today let us discuss what is a poetry, a topic from SYBA Special English Discipline Specific Elective, previously known as Special Paper 2 of Savitribai Phule Pune University. Poetry is a very ancient form of literature. Aristotle defines poetry in his Poetics as an art of imitation. For him, all forms of literature were poetry. In the words of Aristotle, all creative literature is poetry. In the course of time, poetry was differentiated from other forms of literature such as drama, novel, short story, etc. No single definition of poetry is complete. On the other hand, each definition of poetry throws light on the different aspects of poetry. According to the Romantic poet William Wordsworth, poetry is a spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings. It takes its origin in emotions recollected in tranquility. What Wordsworth means to say is that poetry is a very natural expression of the poet, and the emotion is the basis of a poem. For him, spontaneity and emotion are two important aspects of poetry. A very well known poet and critic, Philip Sidney, defines poetry as an art of imitation, a representing, counterfeiting, or figuring forth, to speak metaphorically, a speaking picture with this end to teach and delight. For Philip Sidney, the main aim of poetry is teaching and delight, and that is done through the words, images, and the musical aspects of poetry. Poetry frequently rely for its effect on imagery, word association, and the musical qualities of the language used. Sidney views that poetry creates pictures through words, and teaching and delight are the two important functions of poetry. A very well known Victorian poet and critic, Matthew Arnold, defines poetry as a criticism of life under the conditions fixed for such criticism by the law of poetic truth and poetic beauty. Arnold defines poetry as a criticism of life. In other words, it must concern itself with life and its problems. The idea, the subject matter, the theme of poetry should be relevant to the lives of people. For him, poetry is an application of ideas to life. According to Arnold, poetry is not merely an intellectual exercise, it is the subject to the laws of poetic truth and beauty. For him, poetry is a philosophical as it tries to interpret life. In short, poetry is loaded with meaning, that is, more meaning is expressed in minimum words. Poetry is a musical in the sense that poetry uses rhythm and meter to make it musical. Symbolic use of language is an important characteristic of poetry. Poetry aims at teaching and delighting the reader. It also presents philosophical aspect of life. In short, the aim of poetry is providing the reader an aesthetic pleasure with moral teaching.